Wow, this is, you're going to enjoy this. This lady is strong. She received a degree in elementary education and was expecting to find a husband and settle down quietly. And instead, she found the beginning of a very phenomenal career and was anything but quiet. And it's not that she's fearless. In fact, her motto is, do it scared. Kathryn Childers.
Hello. I'm delighted to be here. It was interesting last night, a lot of the folks had listened to this banter about how I traveled with Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis with a 357 Magnum in my purse, and there was question about whether or not I was carrying it. And I said, well, actually, you won't know, but if I don't get a standing ovation, I'll shoot you in the knees. Wow, how can it be that that one thing changed my life? That one thing made the direction that I would go. And in my case of all things, that one thing is a can with big holes in it that I was able to shoot off a post from, about here, halfway down the hall, when I was about 8 years old. My father had an old 22. He taught me lots of things, but he said, now you can learn to do this. So we did it again. We squeezed it up in the corner. And I said, I'm just too scared. And he said, honey, just do it scared. That kind of idea flavors the next few minutes that I'm going to spend with you telling you about my crazy life. My crazy life is one where I've done more things, I think I'm up to 12 now, careers, adventures, things than most people do in a lifetime because they're afraid of it. Most of the careers I've had literally scare people to death because of a few people like me and Gloria Steinem and a few folks who said, I'm going to go out and do something. I went to Washington, and I admitted to this congressman I could type, and I became a military caseworker. And in Vietnam, that was an important congressman. A friend of mine said, you won't believe this, but they're hiring female bodyguards for Tricia Nixon. I said, really? Do you get to travel? You know, I'd always wanted to be a Pan Am stewardess, but you know, the Pan Am stewardess, you had to weigh a certain amount, you had to weigh in every week, you had to be certain height, you had to be certain age. That was harder than getting into Harvard. Probably harder than getting into the Secret Service. But I said, they're hiring female bodyguards? And she said, yeah, but you need to be able to shoot a gun. She said, I'd be afraid to do that. And I went, I can do that. Remarkably, my high school had a rifle team. A girls' rifle team in 1965, and we shot competitively against boys all over the country because there weren't many girls' teams. And I ended up being a distinguished expert national rifle champ, one of the best in the state. And I got an interview with a man named Clint Hill. You may remember Clint Hill was the man, the agent, that climbed on the back of the limousine in Dallas in 1963 to save Jacqueline Kennedy. And I was 22, from Pueblo, Colorado, with an elementary education degree, doing something that would scare most people to death, and I found it absolutely fascinating. The training, just imagine, I got to shoot an Uzi submachine gun. I was trained with a 357 Magnum, and I was good at that. I was trained in hand-to-hand combat. I was one of one woman in a class of 35 men that went through the entire Secret Service training system, and guess what role they had me play? The secretary. I swore for $7,500 a year, I would protect the president, the vice president, former heads of state, the children of the former President John Kennedy, and any other kind of thing that Richard Nixon, as President of the United States, decided to send us to do. I was behind the door screaming, Secret Service, get out of the car! And all of a sudden, I felt the cold steel of a revolver behind my right ear. And the words, bang, you're dead. And we thought they were going out the window. And he looked at me and he said, you're so tough, Clark. He said, you break down the door. And he's 280, big guy, big shoulders, you know. That time I was rather lithe and cute, and I was not as good at breaking down doors. And I said, Haynes, why don't you break down the door and I'll shoot them? Then one day they called me and they said, oh, we've decided to put you on the Kennedy detail. And I said, okay, what does that mean? you will be protecting John, who's 7, and Caroline, who is 13. And I said, okay, what are my responsibilities here? And they said, keep her alive, keep them safe, keep them happy while you're keeping them alive, and keep them from embarrassing the President of the United States and their mother, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. You heard me say they were 13 and 7. I would take Caroline to school in New York, and at the end of the day, she came out and she said, oh, I'm tutoring today. And I said, okay. She said, it's over in Bedford-Stuyvesant, I'll show you where to go. So we're driving down First Avenue, and on this day it was just me. There weren't backup agents, it was just me. Mrs. Onassis had decided that the fewer agents Caroline had, the more privacy she had, and I was called the pistol packing nanny. So I would put my 357 Magnum in my purse with my 6 extra rounds of ammunition, my gun, my badge, my commission book, and my Love That Red Revlon lipstick. That was all that I could have for makeup. I began to make that left-hand turn to cross First Avenue, and BAM! I'm T-boned. And I had just been at sniper training and that kind of training in Washington, where they showed us how this exact kind of situation would happen, that any moment there would be other cars that would come in and cut you off, and that one of the bad guys would grab your protectee, in this case Caroline, that there would be snipers in the roof that they had planned, they would shoot me, they would take her, and that would be the end of the story. And we had prepared for that. I jump out of the car, pull my 357 Magnum out, and I'm pointing it at this 62 Caddy with fins. Didn't look like your typical assassin car or bad guy car. Pushed him up over the head of the car, got the bang, got the gun right behind his ear, and I go, Secret Service, you're under arrest, don't move. Meanwhile, waiting for the flash of bullets and snipers and other cars, and the guy's going, Lady, you hit me! Lady, you hit me! It was a one-way street. I had a card, I gave him a card, and I said, you know, Secret Service is going to fix this car up just like brand new. This is your lucky day. Just call them. Meanwhile, I'm back in the car. Caroline peeks up over the edge of the seat and says, you know what? You're pretty good. Since there were only 5 of us, we were taken all over the country. I worked with Senator Kennedy on his detail when he ran for president. I worked with Tricia Nixon. I worked undercover doing all the anti-war kinds of things. I investigated threats against the president in New York and Washington and Houston. And I was just traveling everywhere. But then whenever the kids traveled, I would be taken back to the Kennedy detail. Well, I was in New York, and Mrs. Kennedy was walking down the street. She said, oh, Miss Clark, how are you? And I said, well, I'm fine. She said, what are you up to? I said, well, next week I'm going to be protecting the Queen of Spain, because I was assigned to the Foreign Dignitary Division. And I just finished doing an undercover assignment in Florida, and I said, I'm just really quite busy. And she smiled and she said, oh, Miss Clark, you live such an interesting life. And I remember saying, Mrs. Onassis, it's only relative. In fact, I was assigned to the Queen of Spain. Their last stop was the Apollo 14 blastoff. And back in Utah, where my parents had retired in this little city of Pleasant Grove, my parents were watching the blastoff. There were 2 things they did regularly, 3 actually. They watched the blastoff, they watched the Miss America pageant, and they watched Lawrence Welk. Now, the likelihood of seeing me in the Miss America pageant or in Lawrence Welk was highly unlikely. But as my mother was sitting there watching the 14, the blastoff, I'm standing between Neil Armstrong, the man who walked on the moon, Vice President Agnew, and directly behind the Queen of Spain. The King of Spain was on my left. And Walter Cronkite's going, and we have the King of Spain, and we've got the, he said, we have this unidentified woman. I'm not sure who she is. I was loving this. I was in the midst of history. I was listening to the man who walked on the moon talk about what it was like and how he was a little nervous when he took that first step. And I heard recently, he didn't have his remarks planned, that one step for mankind, giant leap for the world or whatever. He didn't even have that plan. Can you imagine the fear of hitting the last moon dust step and not knowing what you're going to say for the millions of the world? Anyway, at home my mother's going, "Daddy, come in here. Kathryn's on TV and she's got a gun in her purse." She said she'll never get married. No man will ever marry her. She calls my sister on the phone and says, "Anna," my sister had been the good sister. She married a doctor from Corpus Christi. She said, "Anna, you've got to find her a husband." Well, my sister came through, and she found me a psychiatrist. You notice how you all laugh about the psychiatrist. You know, nowadays I can say I sleep with my shrink. That's been going on 30 years. But she found me a husband in Corpus Christi, Texas. Do you know what it's like to move from Washington, New York, Scorpios, Los Angeles, Chicago to Corpus Christi, Texas? Because I got very, very involved in community service. I helped start a project called Bayfest in Corpus Christi for the bicentennial. What I found was there was this chasm between the Hispanic culture and the Anglo culture in Corpus Christi. There was no big community event for everybody where we shared our cultures and our food and our difference and did something for fun and free where everybody got together. Then I got involved in the medical community. I got involved in this, that, and the other, and this. But then I ran for city council. They needed a token woman. I've been a token woman most of my life. So I ran for city council. And I lost. Best thing that ever happened to me. In this case, after all this volunteer work, which is a whole other story, and I lost the city council, the news director from the ABC affiliate calls me and said, "Would you be afraid to do a morning show?" I said, "Afraid to do a morning?" He said, "Well, you have to talk to people." He says, just do it. Just have a show that we can tell the FCC that we do. Went to David Hartman to learn how to do this, because I've always learned, and this is one of the things in my books, is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Look who does it well. When you get a toe in the door, it's great to be underestimated. It's really fun. We did things that no one would believe. We brought in Jodie Benson to sing Little Mermaid when we opened our aquarium in Corpus Christi. We did live shots with a little truck that you never could have done this kind of thing in Chicago because I wouldn't have thought it was possible. Then I figured out that I could get on the ABC marketing board because most people didn't run. It was a tiny little market, but somebody had to represent it. There wasn't anything wrong with being leader. I had more constituents as the head of the small market division than most of the people did in the big market. Well, you heard that I started a group that raised money to give away 18,000 mammograms now to women in need. My son Clark is here with me today. He told me about a friend of mine who was his teacher who was dying of breast cancer. And he said, "You guys do all this stuff for the art museum, for the aquarium, so why don't you do something about your friends that are having breast cancer?" So I asked my brother-in-law, I said, "What do you do? I'm not Susan B. Coleman's sister. What can I do?" He said, "Give away mammograms." He's a radiologist. So a group of 5 of us started this thing called First Friday, and for the last 20 years or so, we've been doing events. We've given away 18,000 mammograms to anybody who needs them. You don't have to fall through the cracks. You don't have to be so poor that you can't afford to feed your kids. You just need one. And that's the gist of what we do. After I left TV, I kind of was, have you ever left a career or retired or whatever and you go, you know, I used to be somebody. I used to do something. Life's kind of boring. What am I going to do? And then on Christmas Eve 2004, it snowed in South Texas. It was like we got up Christmas morning and it was a miracle. It was the best Christmas ever. Somebody said it was the Christmas every kid got the same gift and we were all kids. People met their neighbors. They were throwing snowballs. The Yankees were showing them how to do snow angels. They didn't know how to do snow angels. It was a miracle. And my message is, if a miracle falls in your lap, do something with it. Don't just do one thing. And my other theory is never do anything for just one reason. We did 3 things. We did a first coffee table book called Snow, a second coffee table book called More Snow. Clark wrote a children's book called More Snow for Kids, and then we made a symphony out of it, and a CD. And it sold better than Harry Potter and H.E.B. books. We found out later, we were too stupid to know, that we would have made the New York Times bestseller list. People always ask me, who was the most interesting, handsome, the real winner interview of all the people I interviewed? And I have to say it was Robert Wagner. Is Brad here? Where's Brad? Did Brad come in? Brad? Come here, Brad. I need your help. Oh, he's cute. Anyway, so we used to go out to California and interview these stars. And it was always important to me to come up with a good question. Yes, thank you, John. All right, my question to Robert Wagner was, Robert, and he had great blue eyes. I said, if you had to choose from all of the characters you played, Heart to Heart, you remember Heart to Heart? I always thought I looked a little bit like Stephanie Powers. And I hope to goodness that I did that day, but I'm not sure. But anyway, he said, of all the characters you played, who would you choose to marry your oldest daughter? Kind of a thinking question. And he thought for a moment and said, okay. All right, I'm going to phrase the question one more time. Robert, if you had to choose of all the characters you played to marry your oldest daughter, who would you choose?
Oh, Kathryn, what a wonderful question.
Okay, a little sexier. My husband's a little older than I am. He's just almost 80, so I do all the driving, all the backing up, because my theory at this point is when you're 65, you better learn to back the darn thing up. Women don't, but they can. Thank you for being with me today. I appreciate it. Now, on my cue, I'll whistle, and you can all give me a standing ovation so I don't have to shoot you